a certain degree, it did help that the cars then didn't overheat. Onto the homeward journey, the Nissan Navara crew plastered on the pace, and in the forest, the windy conditions didn't make it any easier. Luckily, the route had dried out somewhat. The 39-year-old Nobre and 30-year-old Palmero were combining well in the car, and Nobre was proving that his second place in the 06 Pharaoh Rally in Egypt was no fluke, even though they wrong-slotted here. Leg 3 would be another 8-hour slog for the Mitsubishi team, but they were certainly very consistent and took no chances. Their hearts were set on a finish. The dust, though, was becoming a factor as things dried out, and that's what Van Tonder and Kwapo were finding out. Luckily, they didn't have to contend with too much of it in front of them. While the whites were again putting together one of the quickest drives of the day in the Rubicon Bat. David drove solo for a while in last year's ABSA series, but the moment he got his brother into the car, they became championship contenders, and they'll be a force to be reckoned with when the points are tallied up at the end of the 8-race-long series. The side note and Lock was still piling on speed as the NTT Toyota Delmas team took everything they and the terrain could throw at it, and they were loving it. Back at the Fish River Sun, there was happiness for the Nissan crew as they maintained their dominance at the front after a strong drive. But Nobre and Palmero, after sorting out the BM, had actually won the stage by 4 seconds, while the Russians could not get the Nissan's drive shaft repaired in time to start. With the serenity of the beautiful Fish River Sun golf course and the rising sun greeting them, the drivers, however, knew that the next morning was make or break. Day 4 and the final day of hard racing dawned crisply and rather coolly, but the men still left standing in the 2007 African Heritage Cross Country would need all their smarts to get it back to the finish line to get the points they needed on the World Series log. For the final time, crews and drivers made sure that everything was ready to be broken just one more time.
Yeah, no, definitely. We've learned a lot. This race is so much different from the other races. We've got a little bit of everything here. We've got very, very fast sections here, faster than any other race. And then you've got the forest sections and the mountain passes. We've got a lot of experience from this race.
And that's the only way to learn. For the Delmas lads, there was a scary moment or two.
Ja, ons het nie baie probleme gehad. Ons het op 'n stadium met ons bietjie brieke verloor daar by een van die bergpasse en goeders af. Dit ons maar, jy weet, bietjie gepace, stadiger gery en hom gevat tot by DSP en ons weer die brieke reg gemaak daarso. So ja, andersins ag nie regtig moeilikheid nie, ja.
In the Rubicon Cup, there was a surprise for David White at interview time.
Okay, so I didn't know I was leader of the pack until now. I thought Kuko was past me, but apparently with the time difference, I'm still ahead to about 35 seconds. And we're just going to push again and keep it on the road. There's not much 250 k's we have to do today, and we're going to go out flat out and enjoy it again and just try to keep the car on the road and not like yesterday all over the road, but we'll try our best.
The Norwegian Tollefsen, with his overly developed sense of speed and adventure, was battling to hold back, but on the last day, he was determined to do it right.
I think the biggest problem is just to hold back, because I said I was going to hold back yesterday, and it's a very great temptation to just race as always. It's just a lot more fun to race, and the only wise thing now to do is to hold back, save the car, make sure there's no mistakes, because it's so crucial for us to get a win and to get the priority for that car.
And the Brazilian car had to do it the other way round. They had to go flat out to catch the Nissan. As things were, the proudly South African Nissan Navara came out of the blocks flying and built an even bigger lead. And the liaison stage would be make or break for them. Keep it going, but not slow enough to give away too much time. Luckily, they had more than an hour's lead to play with. Early on, the crew of Nobra and Palmero gave it stick and tried as hard as they could in the X3 in the colours of the X-Raid. But this very experienced team unfortunately had disaster lurking for them not long after these shots were captured. The old adage, don't count them before they've hatched, was probably coined for off-road racing. The Italians were storming through the last day in the little Pajero and were actually outpacing the Nissan, going great guns after firmly getting to grips with the South African conditions. The whites in their back turned up the heat and were obviously having a fun time. David was probably still smiling under that helmet of his as they blazed by on their way to the second fastest clocking of the day. Fantonda and Guapa were going well, but at least they corrected it. Still, they set the fastest time of 3 hours and 21 minutes, the quickest of the fourth and final day's racing. They were very impressive in amongst the internationals, proving that they could hold their own very well. But they did wrong slot a few times on stage 4. Ramon Boseidnout and Stefan Locke were still doing the farming town of Delmas proud and were actually clocking the third fastest time for the last 250 k's worth of racing. A good performance. But there was a big scare for Tollefson and Quinn. They hit a cow a few k's out from the finish, lost their bonnet and almost lost the radiator and had to nurse the Nissan through to the line. It was sounding a little worse for wear. And that allowed Ricardo Garossi and Rudy Briani in their Rally Art Mitsubishi to win the final stage by exactly 4 minutes. But in the greater scheme of things, it made very little impact. It was, however, a great moral victory for the visitors from Italy.